This is NVIDIA's RTX 4060 Ti, and it costs $400. I was out of the country on vacation when this released, so I'm a bit late to the party with my coverage on it. So instead of doing a standard review, which you've probably already seen plenty of from other channels by this point, I decided to build a PC around it. This one right here actually, which comes in right around $1,000 GPU included. This PC is representative of realistic parts someone buying this card might actually want to use it with. Now, just because I plan to build around this does not necessarily mean that it is good value and worth your money. We'll have to determine that after we take a look at the benchmarks, because I'll also be showing it compared to some other cards you might consider if you're in the market for one and have around $400-ish on hand. That way we can see if this is really worth the price tag that NVIDIA slapped on it, or if it's just a flop. But first, let's check out what we're working with here. And real quick, this video is sponsored by Solidigm and their P41 Plus SSD. More on this later on in the video. So starting off in this build, we've got the processor. We've got the Intel i5-12400, which continues to be a great value option for sub $1,000 systems. I used the 12400 to demonstrate in this build because I already had one on hand, but don't grab one of these if you don't need the integrated graphics. You can save yourself around 20 bucks by going with the 12400F. Specs and performance between the two are otherwise identical. You can use the Intel style cooler if you're really tight on cash, but I'd highly recommend to at least grab a tower style cooler. This ID Cooling SE214XT is pretty much fixed at 20 bucks on Amazon and well worth the price since it'll run no speed cooler and quieter than the stock one. For the motherboard, we've got the Asus Prime B660 Plus D4. I usually keep it simple with motherboards, nothing fancy here. This is by all means entry level, but doesn't completely cut corners when it comes to things like heat sinks on the VRMs and top M.2 slot, as well as having USB Type-C connectivity for both rear and front I/O. I should note that the updated B760 version of this board is almost identical except with PCIe Gen 5 compatibility, so if you can find it for the same price or just barely more, then that's a great alternative. Alright, now let's talk about the graphics cards. So the RTX 4060 Ti is the main card that we're interested in checking out here, being the newest and cheapest option from NVIDIA's current gen. At $400, it doesn't have much competition from AMD. AMD's current lineup is, the cheapest is the 7600, which is 300 bucks, so not really in the same ballpark as this. But then there's like this huge gap to their current gen 7900 XT at like 900 bucks. So yeah, a huge void there for AMD. They need to catch up. So I actually had to go back to last gen's RX 6700 XT for the closest priced card from AMD side. Though this is a bit cheaper, this is currently found for around 340 bucks new. I also tested NVIDIA's last gen RTX 3060 Ti. I did this so that we can see what the direct generation to generation performance uplift looks like, and these are also around $340 new right now. Last, I tested the RTX 3070 because it is the most direct price-to-price competition with the 4060 Ti at the moment, carrying that exact same $400 price tag on websites like Newegg and Amazon. And keep in mind, I am only talking about new prices here. All of these last gen cards can be found for cheaper in the used market, of course, but for an apples to apples comparison, I'm using new current prices as the reference. Here are some of the key specs of these cards side by side. Just looking at the 4060 Ti next to its predecessor, the 3060 Ti, on the surface it looks like a more cut down card with less CUDA cores, less tensor cores, as well as a trimmed down memory bus width, half compared to the 3060 Ti, 128 versus 256. NVIDIA has addressed this, claiming that the much larger L2 cache on the 4060 Ti results in the memory bus being more efficient, thus the reduced width is not an issue, and we'll have to see whether or not this is true. But either way, we can't fully judge these cards based on their paper specs due to architectural differences between generations. Core per core, clock per clock, it's not directly comparable. That's what the benchmarks are for, which we'll see later on in the video. With that said though, one glaring spec that has been a big topic of discussion recently in the gaming community is video memory, with all three of these NVIDIA cards equipped with 8GB of VRAM, and the sole AMD card, which is one of the lowest price of this bunch, equipped with 12GB. Again, we'll have to see how that plays out in the benchmarks. Finishing off the rest of the system, I opted for 32GB of RAM in this build. Here we've got my go-to Team Group Delta RGBs. These are 3600 CL18. The cost of memory continues to go down and down, and for a system at this price range, it's really easy to fit 32 gigs in without second guessing it, and we'll see why this isn't completely overkill later on when games like Diablo 4 and Last of Us are tested. The SSD used in this build is the 1TB Solidigm P41 Plus. As mentioned earlier, they are the sponsor of this video, but sponsor aside, their products are great and are very good options for the types of builds I like to showcase on the channel like this one. The P41 Plus is a consumer PCIe Gen 4 SSD that delivers solid performance without breaking the bank. It features read and write speeds up to 4 and 3 gigabytes per second respectively, and makes for both a great fresh SSD in a new system like this one, or as an upgrade for older SATA-based SSD or spin mechanical drive systems. If you're not familiar with Solidigm and tend to stick with more familiar brands, then have no fear, because Solidigm was created from parent company SK Hynix when they acquired Intel's NAND and SSD division, both which have been in the SSD game for a long time with decades of experience. You can unlock further potential of Solidigm SSDs with their Synergy driver, which is free to download and use to optimize performance. Just by installing the software without configuring anything, the drive can deliver up to 120% faster random read speeds even when your drive is 50% full, and up to 20% faster random write speeds. This will keep your PC feeling nice and snappy, similar to how it feels when you first install a fresh copy of Windows. The rest of the Synergy Suite toolkit has plenty of useful features that can be used with SSDs from any manufacturer, Solidigm or not, to check on things like your drive health, temperatures, and more. Available in 512GB, 1 and 2 terabyte capacities, backed by a 5-year warranty, and priced very affordably, whether you're in the market for a drive to put in a fresh system or adding additional storage to an existing build. Definitely check out the Solidigm P41 Plus. For the power supply, we've got the Corsair CX650M, which will be able to handle all the cards I threw at the system no problem. These go for $80, which unfortunately is pretty standard pricing right now for a power supply that's at least C tier on the tier list and at least 600 watts. Depending on which graphics card you actually end up with in the system, you might be able to get away with something that is lower wattage. The 4060 Ti is actually a pretty efficient card, and you'll see this later on in the benchmarks. You just have to keep in mind how much headroom you want in case you want to upgrade to more power-hungry components down the line. And last but not least, the case, the Fantex Eclipse G300A. I recently did an in-depth review of this, and I like it a lot. One of my favorite things about this is that it's only $70 for this version that comes with 3 adjustable RGB fans. They do sell a version with 1 ARGB fan that's $60, but the bang for buck play is the 3-fan version. You can check out my detailed review video for more information, but in a nutshell, this is a very solid case to build in that follows in the footsteps of Fantex's many other Eclipse cases, with good ventilation and plenty of room for upgrades down the road. Here's a quick summary for the build to give you an idea of how the budget was allocated. It comes in just under $1,000, and the prices shown here are definitely on the conservative side. There's definitely some room to lower the cost if you're patient and do some deal hunting to catch a sale here or there, maybe some promo codes, and of course you can leverage the used market as well. Alright, let's take a look at the benchmarks. For anyone concerned about CPU bottlenecking with the i5-12400, no need to worry. I've minimized it by testing at 1440p with either the highest or the second highest preset graphic settings for all the games. So these GPUs are definitely the ones that will be bottlenecking the system. They're going to be struggling. The CPU is going to be plenty fine. 4060 Ti results will be shown on your left of the screen, followed by the 3060 Ti, then the 3070, and then finally the 6700 XT on the far right. All percentages shown will be relative to the 4060 Ti as the reference. So let's get started. First up, we have Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is an AMD favored title, so the 6700 XT takes the lead here, but it's pretty much neck and neck with the 4060 Ti. The 3070 doesn't trail too far behind, and the 3060 Ti falls in last place as expected. Not a great start for the 4060 Ti, but again, AMD cards definitely have an advantage on this title. In Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the 4060 Ti takes the win, having a sizable lead over its last-gen predecessor, and also besting the equivalently priced 3070, though its performance starts to look pretty underwhelming when you have AMD's $340 card right on its tail. It doesn't get that much better in Diablo 4, where we see that if the video memory is there, the game will use it. All 12GB are being used on the 6700 XT, which is neck and neck with the 4060 Ti. Here, the 3070 actually sneaks by with a very slight win, which is somewhat kind of disappointing to see. Why is this card that's available for the same price as the 4060 Ti from last gen coming this close to it, let alone beating it at all? In Forspoken, the 4060 Ti and 3070 are pretty much tied, and here the 6700 XT comes in last place, pretty much tying in performance with the 3060 Ti. Frames per dollar though, the 3060 Ti and 6700 XT offer similar value propositions, since both cards are 15% cheaper than the 4060 Ti and perform roughly that much worse as well. In Forza Horizon 5, we see that the 4060 Ti leads the pack, though it bears repeating, for the price premium you're paying over any of these other cards, you'd hope to see a larger gap in performance than we're actually seeing here. Now, if at this point you're yelling at the screen and screaming about me about things like how much more efficient the 4060 Ti is, how it comes with added features like AV1 encoding, DLSS 3, frame generation, Don't worry, I'll address those things. We're just looking at raw performance right now. Next is Halo Infinite, and here we see a decent win for the 4060 Ti. The lead it has over all these cards is more reflective of its asking price compared to some of the results we've seen so far. But don't get too excited, it's actually pretty linear. Frames per dollar, the 4060 Ti and 6700 XT are pretty much tied here. One of the most disappointing results that I found was with Hogwarts Legacy. Here, the 4060 Ti barely manages to not come in last place, which is completely embarrassing considering it's one of the most expensive cards in this grouping, and it's the newest product to be released. To me, this is pretty unacceptable by all accounts. I don't care if it's more efficient, I don't care if you have all these other added features like I mentioned earlier. How do you have a newly released product perform nearly identical to the predecessor it's meant to replace? That same predecessor, which has taken price reduction, it is now noticeably cheaper than this newer card. And I don't even care if this is only on a handful of titles. It should not be happening at all on any title. Moving on, in Spider-Man Miles Morales, the 4060 Ti redeems itself a bit, coming in first place, but by some pretty lackluster margins once again. Remember, the 3060 Ti and 6700 XT cost 15% less, so performing only 12% worse makes for a stronger case for them. In The Last of Us Part 1, the 4060 Ti again shows underwhelming results. It's a pretty bad look to tie with the last gen card like the 6700 XT that cost noticeably less, and its performance difference compared to the 3060 Ti and 3070 leaves much to be desired. Now, what we're seeing here is at high settings, the second highest graphics preset for The Last of Us. And we already see all the NVIDIA cards nearing that max VRAM usage, with the 6700 XT going well over 8 gigabytes. Well, let's just see what happens when we turn the settings up to Ultra. We're not even going 4K here, we're still at 1440p. Here you really see where the benefits of more video memory would have come in, because the 6700 XT now leads in performance, and you can see from the screen stats that the game will definitely use more VRAM if it is there, like we said earlier. Sure, the performance on all three 8GB NVIDIA cards were by all means playable. It wasn't a stutterfest because Naughty Dog patched the game since launch to address the VRAM issues that they had initially, but this really speaks volumes when a $340 last gen card can beat a $400 current gen card solely due to the amount of video memory it has. The last game we'll look at is Cyberpunk. Without any ray tracing turned on, the 4060 Ti loses to both the 3070 and 6700 XT and has a pretty unimpressive lead over the 3060 Ti. Now, these next results are where people who are loyal to NVIDIA will rejoice, because it's not a secret that AMD has been trailing behind NVIDIA when it comes to ray tracing performance, and we can clearly see that here. With ray tracing enabled, the NVIDIA cards all stay within relatively the same position of each other, and the AMD card takes the biggest L here, coming in dead last by quite a large margin. The question is though, how much do you really care about ray tracing? Do you always have it enabled if the option is available? If it's really important to you and one of the top factors when making the decision to purchase a new graphics card, even more than like price and rasterization performance alone, then it's pretty simple. NVIDIA wins hands down and AMD just simply can't compete. Then we have the topic of frame generation, exclusive to only the new gen NVIDIA cards. So 3070 and 3060 Ti won't have it, 6700 XT definitely doesn't have it. But revisiting the results that we saw earlier, where the 4060 Ti showed pretty lackluster performance compared to the other cards, flipping on the frame generation switch, it has now blown well past them. This trend is what you'd see in any game that supports frame generation, and therein lies the problem, if the game supports it. So what if the game doesn't support it? You're just going to deal with underwhelming performance? Last of Us doesn't have official frame generation support. You can only get it through a mod created by a community member. So you're just going to buy a card for this feature and just pray that it's supported on all the games you currently play, any of the past games that you enjoyed, and then hopefully for any future game coming out. It feels like NVIDIA really tried to leverage every other feature of the 4060 Ti to help it sell instead of delivering on raw rasterization performance alone. They're really pushing the fact that it's efficient, which to their credit, it really is. Did you notice the power draw throughout those results? The 4060 Ti comes in well under the other three cards. It would also be unfair for me not to mention its AV1 encoding capabilities, which this has, and the other three cards simply do not have. This is extremely valuable to a very particular subset of users out there, myself included, since I do stream. The issue for me is how many people actually care about all those little extra things as much as they do that raster performance uplift, which was only realistically 10 to 15%. Yeah, some of the games it was more than that, but also some of the games it was no improvement over the last gen equivalent. So final thoughts on the 8GB 4060 Ti. I think it should be cheaper. $350 if Nvidia really wants to woo us, but if not, maybe $375 max. I do recognize that some people with a very specific set of criteria and what they need out of a graphics card can find value in this. I don't doubt that at all. Everyone else though can either find better value in an AMD graphics card, as was shown throughout the benchmarks, or buy a used Nvidia card if you really have to stick with Team Green for one reason or the other. Used 3070s are less than $300 right now, to put that into perspective. That about wraps it up for this video though, and I'm going to leave you with this fun hypothetical question, because you know I love my hypotheticals. If someone approached you with $400 in hand, looking to buy the best graphics card they can get, they're not willing to buy used, and they care about ray tracing performance, what do you recommend them? Based on the current market, there's really only two options, the 3070 and the 4060 Ti. You have to choose one, so what's going to be? I think this scenario right here is exactly why Nvidia positioned this card the way they did at the price that they did. They know exactly what they are doing. They know the options we have in front of us, and there's not much. So yeah, look forward to reading your response down in the comments below. I want to thank Solidigm again for sponsoring this video. I want to thank you all, as always, for watching and for continuing to support the channel. And thanks to the channel members, as always, for their above and beyond support. Be safe out there, and I will see you all down in the comments, as well as the next stream and or video. Bye.